I stood at the iron gates of my grandfather's estate, dressed in black, my heart pounding with a mixture of grief and hope. The old man had raised me when no one else would. He'd been my rock, my protector, the only person who ever truly saw me. And now he was gone. As I approached the entrance, my father stepped forward from the crowd of relatives I barely recognized. His face was cold, almost cruel. "We all agreed," he said loud enough for everyone to hear, "you are not welcome here." The words hit me like a physical blow. Around him, aunts and uncles I hadn't seen in years nodded in agreement, their faces twisted with something that looked almost like satisfaction. I had come to say goodbye to the men who saved my life, and they were turning me away like I was nothing. Like I had always been nothing to them. Before we go any further, if you love stories about justice, revenge, and people who refuse to stay down when life knocks them over, you're in the right place. Hit that subscribe button and join the Revenge Unleashed family. Drop a like if you're ready for a story that'll make you believe in karma again, and leave a comment telling me what you would have done in my shoes. Trust me, you're going to want to stick around for this one. My name is Elena, and I need to take you back to understand how it all started. My mother died when I was 7 years old. One day she was there, braiding my hair and singing me songs, and the next she was just gone. A car accident, they said. Sudden. Tragic. Life-destroying. My father, Marcus, he didn't handle it well. Actually, that's putting it mildly. He fell apart completely. Within 6 months, he'd lost his job, drained their savings, and started drinking so heavily that some nights he wouldn't come home at all. I remember being 9 years old, sitting in our apartment that smelled like stale beer and disappointment, eating cereal for dinner for the 5th night in a row because there was nothing else. That's when grandfather stepped in. Richard Thornton wasn't just wealthy, he was the kind of wealthy where people in our town spoke his name with a mixture of respect and fear. He'd built a commercial real estate empire from nothing, and he didn't suffer fools. When he found out how his son was living, how I was living, he came to our apartment unannounced. I remember hiding behind the couch, watching this tall, silver-haired man in an expensive suit survey our mess of a home with eyes that missed nothing. He and my father had a screaming match that night. Words like disgrace and failure and innocent child echoed off the walls. When it was over, my grandfather knelt down, looked me in the eyes, and said something I'll never forget, "You deserve better than this. Come with me." I lived with grandfather from age 9 until I left for college at 18. Those were the best years of my life. He was strict but fair. He taught me about business, about standing up for myself, about seeing the world clearly without illusions. He paid for the best schools, made sure I had everything I needed, and more importantly, he was there. At every school play, every parent-teacher conference, every moment that mattered. Meanwhile, my father drifted further and further away. He'd show up maybe once or twice a year, always making promises he never kept, always looking at me with something that seemed like resentment. I didn't understand it then. I thought maybe he blamed me for reminding him of Mom. Grandfather would just shake his head and tell me that some people aren't strong enough to face their own failures. What I didn't know, what grandfather carefully shielded me from, was that his other children absolutely hated this arrangement. My father had 2 brothers and a sister, my uncles Peter and James, and my Aunt Caroline. They'd all grown up wealthy, entitled, expecting their shares of the Thornton fortune to be waiting for them like trust fund babies. But grandfather wasn't that kind of man. He believed in earning your place. Over the years, each of them had disappointed him in different ways. Peter had gambled away hundreds of thousands. James had been caught embezzling from one of the family businesses. Caroline had married and divorced 3 times, each time demanding grandfather bail her out of her poor choices. And my father, well, his failure was me. Or rather, his abandonment of me. I graduated college with honors, got my MBA, and started working in real estate development. Not in grandfather's company, I wanted to make it on my own. He respected that. We had dinner every Sunday without fail. He was in his 80s by then, still sharp as a knife but slowing down physically. During one of those dinners, about 3 months before he died, he told me something that should have been a warning. "I've updated my will," he said casually, cutting into his steak. "The lawyers have been given strict instructions. My children aren't going to like it, but they've made their beds." I asked what he meant, but he just smiled that mysterious smile and changed the subject. I didn't push. I figured it was his business. When the call came that he'd passed away from a heart attack in his sleep, I was devastated. I took a week off work and could barely function. The funeral was scheduled quickly, the whole thing organized by my father and his siblings. They didn't call me to ask about arrangements. They didn't invite me to help plan. The only reason I knew when and where was because grandfather's assistant, Mrs. Chen, called me directly. Even then, she sounded worried. "Elena," she said carefully, "perhaps you should prepare yourself. There's been a lot of talk among the family." I didn't understand what she meant until I showed up at the estate. Being turned away at my grandfather's funeral was humiliating in a way I can barely describe. People were watching. Old business associates, community members, staff who'd known me since I was a child. And my father, looking at me with actual hatred in his eyes, physically blocking my path. "You manipulated a dying old man," he said. "You wormed your way in and poisoned him against his own children. This is our family's moment, and you're not part of this family." I tried to speak, to defend myself, but Aunt Caroline stepped forward too. "You think we don't know what you did? Turning him against us, making him think we were all worthless. You're not welcome here. Leave before we call security." I left. Not because I believed their accusations, but because I was outnumbered and making a scene at a funeral wasn't going to honor grandfather's memory. I sat in my car in the parking lot and cried harder than I'd cried since my mother died. But underneath the grief and humiliation, something else was growing. Anger. Cold, calculated anger. Because I knew the truth. I hadn't manipulated anyone. I'd been a child who needed help, and later an adult who'd built a genuine relationship with a good man. If they thought I'd turned grandfather against them, they'd managed that all on their own. The will reading was scheduled for a week after the funeral. I received an official notice from grandfather's lawyers, which surprised me. Given how my father and his siblings had treated me, I assumed I'd been cut out of everything. But when I called the law firm to confirm, they insisted my presence was mandatory. The reading was held in a downtown conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city grandfather had helped build. I arrived early, and the receptionist gave me a knowing look that I couldn't quite interpret. When my father and his siblings walked in and saw me sitting there, their faces went through a remarkable range of emotions. Shock, anger, outrage. "What is she doing here?" Peter demanded. The lead attorney, a woman in her 60s named Margaret Walsh, adjusted her glasses and said simply, "Miss Thornton was specifically requested by the deceased. Everyone please sit down." The reading started with small bequests. Staff members received generous sums. A few charities got significant donations. Then came the big stuff. Margaret looked at each of Richard's children in turn and said, "To my sons Marcus, Peter, and James, and my daughter Caroline, I leave the sum of $50,000 each." You could have heard a pin drop. $50,000. From an estate worth over $80 million. Peter jumped to his feet. "That's impossible. This is our inheritance." "He can't." Margaret cut him off. "Mr. Thornton can leave his estate to whomever he chooses. Please sit down." She continued. "The primary residence, the vacation properties, the commercial holdings, the investment portfolios, the controlling shares in the family businesses, everything else went to me. Not in trust. Not with conditions. Full ownership." The room erupted. My father was shouting that it was fraud, that I'd manipulated a senile old man. Caroline was crying and screaming about how unfair it was. James was threatening to sue everyone in the building. Through it all, I just sat there in shock. Margaret let them vent for a full 5 minutes before holding up her hand. "There's more. Mr. Thornton recorded a video message to be played at this reading. If you'll direct your attention to the screen." Grandfather's face appeared, recorded probably a month before he died based on how he looked. Seeing him again made my throat tight, but I forced myself to listen. "If you're watching this, I'm gone," he began, his voice still strong and clear. "And I imagine some of you are very angry right now. Good. You should be. But your anger should be directed at yourselves, not at Elena." He went on to detail every disappointment, every betrayal, every time his children had chosen the easy path over the right one. He talked about how they'd treated me over the years, how they'd resented a child for receiving the love and attention they'd squandered. Elena earned nothing from me by manipulation or deceit. She earned it by being present, by being kind, by building something of herself without waiting for a handout. You, my children, taught me that blood means nothing if character is absent. That's when my sadness transformed entirely into resolve. They wanted to fight. They wanted to contest the will and drag this through the courts. Fine. I had resources now. Serious resources. And unlike them, I actually knew how to use them. I hired the best litigation firm in the state. I authorized them to fight every single motion, every delay tactic, every attempt to overturn the will. More than that, I started looking into their lives. Peter had debts everywhere. I bought several of those debts from the original creditors at a discount and called them in simultaneously. James was working for a real estate company that happened to lease their office space from one of my newly acquired properties. When their lease came up for renewal, I didn't renew it under terms he could accept. Caroline's third ex-husband had been given a loan by grandfather that she'd co-signed. I called it in full. I didn't do any of this to be cruel for cruelty's sake. I did it to show them what grandfather had been trying to teach them all along: actions have consequences. You can't spend decades taking advantage of someone's generosity and then claim you're the victim when that generosity stops. The court case dragged on for 8 months. My legal team demolished every argument they made. The judge finally ruled that the will was ironclad, that there was zero evidence of manipulation or diminished capacity, and that grandfather had every right to distribute his estate as he saw fit. They were ordered to pay court costs. But here's where the story gets interesting. After the ruling, after they'd exhausted all their legal options, my father showed up at my office. No announcement, no appointment, just showed up and refused to leave until I saw him. When he walked into my office, he looked 10 years older than at the funeral. Worn down. Defeated. He stood there for a long moment, not speaking. Finally, he said, "I was a terrible father." It wasn't an apology exactly, more of an acknowledgement. I didn't disagree with him. "You were absent," I said. That was somehow worse than terrible. Terrible would have at least meant you were present enough to fail. He nodded slowly. "I blamed you for your mother's death. Not rationally, not in any way that makes sense, but I did. Every time I looked at you, I saw her. And I couldn't handle it. So I ran. From you, from responsibility, from everything. And my father was right. I was weak." Hearing him say it didn't make me feel better. It didn't heal the wounds of a childhood spent wondering why my own father couldn't love me. But it was something. Some small acknowledgement of truth. "Why are you here?" I asked. He looked out my window at the city below. "Because you won. Not just the money, though God knows you won that. You won it becoming the person you wanted all of us to be. And I guess I wanted you to know that I see that now. Too late, but I see it. I didn't forgive him that day. I'm still not sure I've fully forgiven him now, a year later. But I told him the truth. Grandfather didn't leave me his empire because he wanted to punish you. He left it because he trusted me to do something meaningful with it. That's what I intend to do." My father left without another word. I heard later that he'd gotten sober, started working a regular job, stopped asking his siblings for handouts to fuel his resentment. I don't know if that's redemption or just survival, but it's something. As for me, I've been running grandfather's businesses for over a year now. I've made changes, modernized operations, treated employees better than they were treated before. I've set up a charitable foundation in my mother's name that helps children who've lost parents. I have dinner once a month with Mrs. Chen, who's become a good friend. Sometimes I still sit in grandfather's old office, surrounded by his books and his memories, and I talk to him. I tell him about the business decisions I've made, the challenges I'm facing, the life I'm building. The truth about revenge is that it's not always about destruction. Sometimes the best revenge is simply becoming the person your enemies never expected you to be. They wanted me to be nothing, to disappear, to accept their judgment of my worth. Instead, I became everything grandfather believed I could be. I'm not just wealthy now. I'm capable. I'm strong. I'm exactly the kind of person who doesn't need anyone's permission to take up space in the world. My father and his siblings got exactly what they deserved, which in their case was exactly what they'd earned through their own choices. And I got what I deserved too, the chance to honor a good man's faith in me, and to prove that kindness and hard work will always matter more than blood ties and empty entitlement. If you're facing people who underestimate you, who think you don't deserve your place at the table, remember this: the best revenge isn't what you take from them. It's what you become despite them.